Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, the Pittsburgh Center for Pittsfield Center. I'm going to be talking about Pittsburgh in a minute. My name is Evan Weiner. Thank you for inviting me. I started out in this business in 1971, radio and TV. I was at Spring Valley High School, and I was in 11th grade. And Joe Dionisio was my teacher, and I still talk to him 49 years later. He never knew my name. He said, "Student, you have a good voice." I ended up doing Spring Valley High School's radio show, Tiger Talk, a weekly show on WRKL radio. Joe also opened the door for me to work at the Nyack Journal News and the Bergen Record in Hackensack. I have been with WNEW Radio. I'm not going to go through that story. And I've worked with Mutual Radio. I've been on ABC TV with Sam Donaldson, among other things over the years. How this came about was pretty simple. There was a guy by the name of Steve Jacobson. This is 1999. And Steve was a writer with Newsday, Long Island Newsday. And he's complaining about the 1999 Nassau County All football team. And there are no Jewish names on that list. And he starts saying, it's the Jewish mothers, the Jewish mothers. They don't want their kids to play. They want them to be doctors, lawyers. They don't want them to be quarterbacks. Tell me about Jewish athletes. And I had another friend from Spring Valley High School, Roger Benema, and I said, I'm going to do this. And he said, well, what's going to happen after you're done with Sandy Koufax and Hank Greenberg? I said, I'll show you, and I will. This guy here is Lippman Pike. Lippman Pike led all of baseball in 1868 in home runs. He was also the first paid baseball player. Jewish athletes and promoters. Barney Dreyfuss in Pittsburgh. That's me 2 years ago in Pittsburgh. And that is what remains of Forbes Field, a place that Barney Dreyfuss built. Barney Dreyfuss also invented baseball's World Series. This is the University of Pittsburgh, and the wall from Forbes Field is still there. Hank Greenberg, I never met Hank, but I knew his son, know his son Steve. When I was growing up in the 1960s, all I ever heard about was Hank Greenberg and Sandy Koufax. I ended up working with the guy on the left there, Marty Glickman. To his right, or to your right, to his left, Sam Stoller, who I also knew. He ran the Milrose games, and they, of course, never ran. During the 1936 Berlin Olympics, they were benched because, Avery Brundage didn't want Marty to show off his gold medal in front of the Fuhrer's face. And that's Gretel Bergmann. She was the best athlete in Europe in the 1930s, German. She never, ever knew, or she knew she wasn't going to make the German team. I got to meet her in 1993, and I'll tell you more about her and her story a little later on. Gretel Bergmann never did compete in the Olympics in 1936 in Berlin because she was Jewish. And there's Sandy, who's now living in New Hampshire. Sid Luckman. Sid Luckman was the Columbia quarterback who found fame and fortune with the Chicago Bears in the National Football League. And radio and TV, David Sarnoff. David Sarnoff was the founder of NBC Radio, NBC TV, and he put sports both on radio and TV. And the American Football League success in 1965 through 70, a great deal of that success is because of him, because he invested money into the American Football League. And with that, Sonny Werblin, another Jewish guy who owned the New York Jets, was able to pay Joe Namath $127,000 a season, beginning in 1965. So it's Lippy Pike, not Greenberg or Koufax, who was the great baseball player. And he set the standard for great Jewish baseball players. In July of 1866, he hit 6 home runs in a single game and set baseball's first, Major League Baseball's home run record. Less than a handful of players have ever hit more home runs in a game. In fact, none of them, 5. Lippy hit 6, but it was a totally different game in 1866. You used to call for your pitchers. You know, you want to pitch right here, and you would hit it, and all kind of balls, all kind of strikes. There weren't really the rules of the game that we know today. But Luckman Pike was also the first paid professional baseball player. He played in Philadelphia. And he was the great home run hitter in the 1860s. Didn't really face too much anti-Semitism from what I read. In 1872, Lippy hit 17.2% of all of the home runs in the league that he happened to be playing with. That number, 17.2% of all the home runs, was not bested until 1920, when Babe Ruth set the record of hitting almost 21% of the home runs in the American League. The last double-digit number was in 1938. Hank Greenberg, 10.28% of all the home runs in the American League. So it's Babe Ruth who has the highest percentage for one season. Lippy Pike, the second highest percentage, batter to league home run percentage, followed by Hank Greenberg. The National Association began operations in 1871, and Lippy Pike was probably the first Jewish manager in baseball. He played and captained, those days it was captain, over in the Albany area, Troy, New York, Haymakers. In those days, the captain was a field manager, and he was also the first Jewish manager in baseball history. He was the first over-the-table paid baseball player. He was the first American Jew to gain national fame as a sports icon. He was baseball's first Jewish player, umpire, and manager, but he's not in the Hall of Fame. Go figure that one out. His mother didn't approve of him playing baseball. In fact, she didn't approve of any of those players or her sons becoming baseball players. Jewish boys should be paying attention to more sensible matters. She's complaining about this in the 1850s, and Jake is complaining about this 140 years later. Baseball became a big part of every kid in Brooklyn's life in the 1850s, and the three Pike boys were no exception. By the 1860s, Boaz, his brother, and Lippman were both playing for the Brooklyn Atlantics. By the way, the Brooklyn Atlantics visited the White House in 1865. President of the United States, Andrew Johnson, was looking to unite the country, North and South, and he thought baseball would be able to do so since both sides agreed that baseball was a fun game to play. Israel Pike, J.E. Pike. There is a third Pike brother, but nobody seemed to know his name in the official baseball records. Israel Pike, J. Pike, or J.E. Pike. In 1877, August 27th, Israel Pike appeared one game for the Brooklyn Hartfords of the National League. It was the only time that Lippman and Israel played together in the major leagues. You go to Pittsburgh and you go to the University of Pittsburgh, go over the pit, and you walk through the campus to the Schenley grounds area. You see this sign, Barney Dreyfuss, owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates, 1900 to 1932. Prior to owning the Pittsburgh Pirates, he owned the Louisville Colonels, a team that was disbanded in 1899, along with the Cleveland Spiders and a couple other teams. And he also had a piece of the Pittsburgh team, and he took some of the players from Louisville, including Hannes Wagner, to Pittsburgh with him. He was an influential person in baseball. The first World Series, 1903, between the Boston Pilgrims and Pittsburgh. That was his brainchild, challenged the American League. He led the Pirates to 6 National League titles, 2 World Series championships, and helped build over at Schenley Park, Forbes Field. Forbes Field is long gone. It's been gone about 50 years. The wall remains. It was the first baseball stadium. It was actually the most expensive baseball stadium built in 1909, and it was made of concrete. And that replaced stadiums that were made of wood. Around 1888, Dreyfuss decided he was going to go into business. It was good enterprise, he thought. And he thought there would be an enormous profit. And he convinced his cousins to get involved with him. And Dreyfus, he was a distiller in Louisville. Dreyfus joined with some other local distillers and invested in the Louisville Colonels of the American Association. Louisville was admitted into the National League in 1892, and then he buys some interest in the Pittsburgh Pirates and takes his best players from Louisville to Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh had one of the early dynasties in Major League Baseball. And again, there is Forbes Field, 436 sign, not far from where Bill Mazeroski hit that home run in 1960 and to beat the Yankees in the World Series. And there was a spot that there is a little star where Mazeroski hit that home run where the ball landed in Pittsburgh. The upstart American League challenged the National League's claim as being the only major league. They started in 1900 as the Western League, and by 1903 they were the American League. Dreyfus brokered a peace deal between the National League and the American League when he challenged the Boston Americans, Boston Pilgrims, they had a number of names in those days, to the best of 9 series between the two pennant winners in October 1903. That is the first modern World Series. And he builds this fireproof stadium, $2 million, Forbes Field, named for the General John Forbes, a British general in the French and Indian War who captured Fort Duquesne from the French army and renamed it Fort Pitt in 1758. Forbes Field opens its gates for the first time June 30th, 1909, and it would close 61 years later. But even though he was an innovator and actually very important to the growth of baseball, it took a long time for Barney Dreyfus to be elected to baseball's Hall of Fame. He did so about 7-8 years ago. So Barney Dreyfus is, you have Lippy Pike and you have Barney Dreyfus, the first Jewish owner, and Lippy Pike, who's the first professional paid baseball player. So he gets into the Hall of Fame in 2008. He was named to the honor rolls of baseball in 1946. And in 2008, he had been dead for 76 years, but he finally made it into the Hall of Fame. Now, John McGraw was the manager of the New York Giants. And John McGraw was looking for the great Jewish player. And then the Polo Grounds was the home of the Yankees and also the Giants. And the Giants rented out the Polo Grounds to the Yankees. And Babe Ruth becomes a Yankee. And all of a sudden, the Yankees eclipse the Giants as the favorite team in New York City. And then, of course, there's the Brooklyn Dodgers, who always had a Jewish player, by the way. And he's looking for the Jewish Babe Ruth. He's going all over the place looking for the Jewish Babe Ruth. And he talked about his quest for a Jewish hero back in 1923 when he was interviewed by the New York World at that time. I was thinking of the World Journal Tribune, the Evening World. And he says, today, I'll give $100,000 for a Jewish player who had the prospect of becoming a real star. It is not generally known, but I had scouts looking for this man for the past 5 years. I have scoured the country without success, but I still have hope. I've tried out a number of candidates. In fact, I'm working with a youngster now, and there is McGraw. And he talked about the stereotypes. I have several reasons for wanting one. The main being that I have never yet seen a Jewish player who was not unusually ambitious. Jewish players are never mediocre. As soon as they realize they can never reach the top, they usually withdraw from the game and go into some other profession where they felt there's a better chance of a goal. Wonder if that had anything to do with the Jewish mothers that Jacobson was talking about it. Another reason is that 50% of the baseball patrons in New York are Jewish. For years, they've been hoping for one of their faith to be a member of the Giants. That is but natural. The failure to develop, though, has never dampened their enthusiasm for the game, not in the least. While he's talking about this, there's a guy across the river at James Monroe High School named Greenberg, who is showing signs that he could be the one. The Giants never went after him. For whatever reason, he never did. Jewish people, according to John J. McGraw, have been great lovers of sport. As far back as General Lew Wallace of Ben-Hur, they developed gladiators, boxers, wrestlers, football players, golfers. It's odd to see so comparatively few in the big leagues. Well, he was right. There was Benny Lewis, Lou Tendler in boxing. Can you imagine what an influence to our game if we had two Jewish players? Like Benny Lewis, the Ghetto Wizard, like a world lightweight boxing champion, 1917 to 1925, and Lou Tendler, whom he battled in two great fights, rival each other in boxing. As always, can you imagine what an influence it would have on our game if we had two Jewish ball players rivaling each other as Benny Leonard, the Ghetto Wizard, and Lou Tender? Can you imagine that? And there's some sort of racial rivalry among the Irish, the French, the Indians, the Germans, the Cubans, the Poles, and others for superiority in baseball. The Reds, for instance, boast a team of all nationalities. With the Jews taking an active part in such athletic rivalry, baseball would be indeed the great melting pot of sports. Johnny Kling, he was a catcher with the Chicago Cubs back in the 19-teens. The greatest catcher, according to McGraw, next to Roger Bresnahan, that I have ever known in my active years as manager was Johnny Kling. Johnny's a Jew, but so great was he as a catcher for the Cubs that many never thought to inquire to his religion of faith. Another comer is Sammy Bone of the Reds. Sammy Ike Samuels of the St. Louis Club, as was Ed Stein. Right now, right at the moment, Bond is the only Jew I can recall in either major league. I don't know what you make of that. He did want a Jew. Baseball player, be a lawyer, be a lawyer. But he wanted a Jew, McGraw. He never got that Jew. Well, he did, actually. The only reason I could give for the scarcity of Jewish players is the great care their parents exercise over their boys for business or professional careers. Many of them develop unusual athletic ability at college and undoubtedly would become star ball players. The parents, though, influence them not to let anything interfere with their mental training for the future. But he did find his guy, Moses Solomon. He did find his guy. And this was the guy he was going to make the king, the Sultan of SWAT, Babe Ruth. This would be the rabbi of SWAT. He would have somebody that was as good as Babe Ruth, except Moses couldn't hit Uncle Charlie a curveball. McGraw purchased Moses Solomon from the Hutchinson, Kansas Wheat Shockers, where Solomon was hitting .421 with 49 home runs. The New York press dubbed Solomon the rabbi of SWAT, the Jewish Babe Ruth. Well, he was the rabbi of SWAT, no question about it. He struck out an awful lot. He swatted at the ball. In 8 at-bats for the Giants in late 1923, he had 3 hits, batted .375. That's his career batting average. His slugging percentage, .500. He was a liability in the field and never appeared in another major league game. Solomon had whacked more home runs in 1 year at Hutchinson than he did the rest of his combined baseball career. He quit in 1930 at the age of 30, became a successful real estate agent. And guess where he ended up? In Florida. The home run king passed away in Miami, June 25th, 1965. Then there was the next one. There was Andy Cohen. Andy Cohen was born in Baltimore but grew up in El Paso, Texas. The Sporting News wrote of Andy Cohen, and this is the 1920s, all the natural characteristics physically of his race. Thick, dark hair, dark skin, keen mentality. The Giants played on his, he was a good player. He was a good player, not a great player, he was a good player. The Giants played on his success on the field with vendors selling ice cream Cohens in the concession stand at the Polo Grounds. He wasn't with the Giants that long, though. With a slot at second base filled by Rogers Hornsby, who was an anti-Semite. With the parent team, Cohen spent the 1927 season in Buffalo, hit .353. He won the league title. He was warmly welcomed by Buffalo's Jewish community, of which Bill Mazer, you might remember Bill Mazer, the sportscaster. I was in Buffalo between 1946 and 1964. He was warmly welcomed by the Buffalo Jewish community, which held an Andy Cohen Day. He was given gifts, including a diamond ring from fans and a black onyx ring from a jewelry store, and other gifts. And there is Andy, who was with the Giants in 1928. Hornsby played 155 games at second base in 1927. He was traded to the Boston Braves. That freed up a slot for Cohen. Cohen had a pretty good year. First year in the major leagues, 274, 24 doubles, 7 triples, 9 home runs. And he was a pretty good defensive player at second base. He turned in double plays, number 4 in the 8-team league, but he was out of the major leagues by 1929. But you know what? Hey, my cousin's Jerry Stiller. You probably don't know that, but I have showbiz in my family. Cohen decided he was going into showbiz. He was in New York, and the Giants had a catcher by the name of Hogan, who kind of like Stiller and Mirror, who came later. Jerry being Jewish and being Irish, although she converted. Cohen and Hogan, or Hogan and Cohen, they became a vaudeville team. They told jokes, sang parodies with Shanty Hogan, an Irish teammate from the Giants who caught for the team. After the 1928 season, they started performing on the Low Circuit. Their first appearance on stage at the Commodore Theater in Manhattan on October 15th, 1928. They earned $1,800 a week, which was more than they could earn during the season. Billed as Cohen and Hogan, except in Boston. They were known as Hogan and Cohen. In a 1960 interview, Cohen reminisced, "If we didn't kill vaudeville, we sure helped." The one who got away from McGraw, and also the Yankees, Hank Greenberg, James Monroe High School, born in 1911. He got away. David Greenberg moved his family from Greenwich Village to the Bronx, across the street from a municipal baseball field in Crotona Park. That's where young Henry Greenberg fell in love with the game. He spent hours hitting the ball in the park, getting the neighborhood kids to shag for him. I met one of those neighborhood kids about 20 years ago in Whippany, New Jersey. He was a guy who's sitting in a wheelchair, and he was in the back. And he raises his hand. He says, "Can I say something? Can I say something?" I said, "Sure, go ahead." He says, "I used to catch the ball, so we used to throw them back." And he says, "I want to tell you something about Hank." I said, "Tell me." He says, "Hank was the biggest guy. He was the biggest guy. And there were rumbles with the Irish kids and the German kids in the area, and there were all kinds of rumbles, and they came after us, you know." And he said that, well, they used to come after us, and we told Hank, "Take your shirt off and go out there." And they would see Hank, and Hank was 6'4", well-built, and they ran the other way. He said, Hank also protected us. I can tell you another story about that when Hank played baseball. There he is at James Monroe High School back in the day. The James Monroe years, he was a multi-star. His best sport wasn't baseball, but basketball, which makes a lot of sense because Jewish kids, when the Jews came over and they ended up on the Lower East Side or in Brooklyn, had no money. Basketball was real cheap. All you needed was a ball, and there were city rims. That's why the Red Auerbach, Red Holtzman, and all those other guys excelled in basketball because they could get a ball, and all they had to do was play all day. He also excelled in soccer, track and field. He wasn't a fan of football, but he went out and tried out to prove he could play. And then he had a catch. He caught a touchdown in the season finale for James Monroe. The Yankees, who were notably anti-Semitic, actually wanted him. They took him to a game. They didn't particularly like Jews, although they did have Jimmy Reese on the team as Babe Ruth's roommate in 1928. His name, Jaime Solomon, Jimmy Reese. But Hank went out there and he saw Lou Gehrig at first base, and he said, "You know what? I'm not going to make it here. The Yankees, the Washington Senators, Pittsburgh wanted him. The Yankee scout Paul Critchell took him to the game at Yankee Stadium, and Critchell said to Greenberg, he's all washed up. In a few years, you'll be the Yankee first baseman. That didn't happen. Greenberg would sign in Detroit and would be a fixture for the Detroit Tigers, and almost broke Babe Ruth's record. He was in Raleigh, Durham in 1930 in the minor leagues. During batting practice, a pitcher by the name of Phil Page reportedly called Greenberg a goddamn Jew after Greenberg lined the pitch that struck him in the knee, but his other teammates, Schoolboy Rowe and Billy Rogel, encouraged the youngster to go out and outplay the bastards. That's what Steve Greenberg told me. In fact, he said during the 1930s, as Hitler was rising in Germany, every time that Hank Greenberg saw a baseball, got a baseball here, he saw a picture of Adolf Hitler on the baseball, and he just wanted to smack the baseball as hard as he could. And Greenberg took his place among the greats there, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Charlie Gehringer. In 1934, his breakthrough season, the new manager, Mickey Cochran, Detroit won its first pennant since 1909. He had 63 doubles, 26 home runs, 139 RBIs, 339 batting average. The High Holy Days. Greenberg wasn't a particularly religious Jew. In fact, he wasn't religious at all. But he said he felt that he had an obligation to his people not to play on the High Holy Days. So he's faced with a dilemma in 1934, whether he should play on Rosh Hashanah, which is on September 10th. In the past, he never hesitated to play baseball on the Sabbath. But the High Holy Days, that's serious business. In 1933, he did not play on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But after much reflection and talking to a rabbi, and I know his video biographer, Aviva Klepper, and she said that the rabbi figured out that he could play on Rosh Hashanah because he was playing a kids game, and the kids were allowed to play during Rosh Hashanah, and that's what the rabbi, according to Aviva, told Greenberg. So he did play that day, and he homered twice, and the Tigers won 2-1, but 10 days later, Tigers won the pennant, and he declined to play on Yom Kippur. Sure, there was added pressure being Jewish. How the hell could you go up to home plate every day and have some son of a bitch call you a Jew bastard and a kike and a sheenie and get on your ass without feeling the pressure? If the ball players weren't doing it, the fans were. I used to get frustrated as hell. Sometimes I wanted to go up in the stands and beat the shit out of them. He almost did against the Chicago White Sox. The late Shelley Saltman, who was a promoter, his uncle Milty played in the 1930s in Boston, actually in Philadelphia, but he hurt his knee and he was training in Boston. They had reciprocal deals, all the teams you could rehab. And Milty went into the clubhouse and he was laying snow, and Greenberg walks in and he says, what you doing? And he said, well, and he said, I know what you do. Listen. Here in Detroit, get rid of that stuff. Don't do this here. Don't ever do this here. Milty had to do it because his mother said, you could play baseball, but you better bring your stone with you. And he says, listen, get out of here. I don't want to ever see that again. He says, we got Dizzy Trout in this team. Dizzy Trout's from Alabama. He's going to call you all kinds of names and all that. I don't want to stand up and defend you. So do me a favor, just leave. Milty left, and Greenberg was okay. The 1927 home run record. 1938, Babe Ruth in 1927 hit 60 home runs. All summer long, he chased Ruth's season single record. 2 home run games, second half of the doubleheader against St. Louis in St. Louis. He has 5 games left, and he only has 2 to tie Babe Ruth. The pressure had been mounting. Greenberg was physically and mentally spent. He didn't hit another home run, finishing at 58. Now, in the 1970s, I talked to a couple old-timers at Shea Stadium. I'm 21, 22 years old. I'm in the business, right? And I asked, was there pressure on you not to give up that 61st home run to Greenberg? And one of the pitchers said, I wasn't going to let that Jew beat me. Steve Greenberg, his son, said that Hank told him, I just never got the good pitches to hit 60 home runs. You decide whether or not it was anti-Semitism or not. Some of the old timers said he just didn't get the balls to hit. And some pitchers said they didn't want to have the Babe's record broken, and they didn't want to be remembered as the guy who threw the pitch to a Jew. Hitler and Greenberg, told you about that, 1938. Now, I'm making good money as a ball player. No one expected war, least of all the players. I didn't pay much attention to Hitler at first or any of the political goings on at the time. I was too stupid to read the front pages, and I just went ahead and played. Of course, as time went on, I came to feel that I, as a Jew, hit a home run. I was hitting one against Hitler. And Hank Greenberg was the first baseball player to enlist in the Army following following December 7th, 1941. He had flat feet. He was drafted, but because he had flat feet, couldn't go in. 3 months go by, and Congress passed a law dictating that men over 28 were not to be drafted. On December 5th, 1941, he had been in the Army. Sergeant Greenberg was given his discharge. He headed home for Detroit to get ready for the 1942 season, but he decided he was going to enlist. And there was Pearl Harbor, and that's the oil spilling picture I took in 2008 at Pearl Harbor. We were in trouble, and there was one thing to do: return to the service. I had not been called back. I'm going on my own accord. Baseball's out the window as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if I'll ever return to baseball. Meanwhile, while that is going on, the 1936 Olympics. That's Avery Brundage on the left. That is Jeremiah Mahoney on the right. Now, if you go to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, and there are all kind of little plaques all over the place, which tell you the history of mostly Jews during the Holocaust, there is a plaque for Jeremiah Mahoney. Why? Because on December 8th, 1935, Jeremiah Mahoney, who is the head of the American Athletic Union, also a judge, and a Catholic, and that's important because he would tour the country after making this announcement with other Catholics, said the United States should boycott the 1936 Berlin Summer Olympics. He would go around the country with Al Smith and James Curley, the governors of New York and Massachusetts. In 1931, Germany got the games because the International Olympic Committee wanted Germany back in the family of nations. They felt that 13 years of isolation was enough. However, the Nazi party leader Adolf Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany and quickly turned the democracy into a one-party dictatorship, which persecuted Jews, Gypsies, Romans, all political opponents, and others. The Nazis also claimed control all aspects of German life, and that extended to sports. The German image didn't look like Adolf Hitler. The Aryan image was a sculptured man or a woman, well-developed muscle tone, heroic strength, and Aryan facial features. There were some Jews in Germany who were doing rather well, like this guy. He was a boxer, Eric Siegel, but he was thrown out of the German boxing club, even though he was the light heavyweight champion of the world, because he was Jewish. And Arnold Penn, he was a tennis player, Daniel Penn rather. He was Germany's top-ranked tennis player. He was taken off the German Davis Cup team. And then there's Gretel Bergmann, who I interviewed in 1993 at the New York Athletic Club, of all places, a place that was highly anti-Semitic. In fact, when I interviewed her, I was with Mark Schneider, and the three of us are in the lobby. And I said, you know, and she was Martha Lambert at this point in the United States. I said, you know, Margaret, that if we were here 20 years ago, we wouldn't be allowed in. She said, better here than in Germany. And that's Ernest Jahncke. Ernest Jahncke was an International Olympic Committee delegate from the United States who put out the alarm in 1935 that things were going amiss in Germany. He sends a letter to the IOC president, the Count André Bollée-Latour, floating the initial idea of an American boycott. He never heard back. The letter, neither Americans nor the representatives of other countries can take part in the games in Nazi Germany. without at least acquiescing in the contempt of the Nazis for fair play and their sordid exploitation of the games. The letter went unanswered. He was thrown out of the International Olympic Committee in 1936, his spot taken by Avery Brundage. On December 8, 1935, it was Mahoney that suggested, let's not go there. Mahoney's concern in 1933, Aryans only policy instituted in all German athletic organizations, with Jews being systematically excluded from German sports facilities and associations. There's no room for discrimination on the grounds of race, color, or creed in the Olympics. The AAU voted in 1933 to accept an invitation to compete in Germany, provided Germany pledged that there would be no discrimination against Jewish athletes. If that pledge is not kept, I personally don't see why we should compete. Franklin Roosevelt did not get involved in this thing. In fact, Roosevelt only urged the American team to go to Berlin. This is the first time in Olympic history that a boycott was called, but Avery Brundage had assurances from the Fuhrer, who turned out to be his business partner, because Brundage owned a construction company, and he built, while the relationship between the United States and Germany hadn't been tattered by that point, he built office buildings, diplomatic office buildings, for the Nazis in Washington, D.C. in 1937. And the Nazi regime turned it down. They toned it down. The anti-Jewish signs were removed. Newspapers weren't putting harsher rhetoric about Jews. It's all an illusion. They wanted to present to the world, all the nations that were coming there, this loving Adolf Hitler, the Hitler with the song in his heart. No Brooks. It was all a false image. But it was a propaganda coup. 49 nations sent their teams to the games, and that legitimized Hitler. Television. Hitler planned to use television. 1935, the first commercial TV comes on in Germany, and he's going to push the Nazi agenda at the Olympics. The TV was on 90 minutes, 3 times a week, and they were going to use that to promote what they were. Except this guy got in the way, Jesse Owens. Jesse Owens and Ralph Metcalf took Sam Stoller and Marty Glickman's spot in the 36th Olympics. TV, 8 hours a day, Berlin and Hamburg. And there was Marty, who I worked with in the 1980s, and Sam, who I knew. The day before their 4x4 relay, that's what they were running, Marty was the fastest kid in Brooklyn, 18 years old, a cocky kid, thought the world of himself. Actually, he did in the 1980s also, but I like Marty. He owes me money, though. The day before the event, they were replaced by Jesse Owens and Ralph Metcalf. They were two of the teams, well, they were the two fastest sprinters on the team. And the coaches claimed they needed their fastest runners to win the race. Marty was devastated. Till his dying day, he was absolutely devastated. He would say the coach, Dean Cromwell and Brundage, were motivated by anti-Semitism and the desire to spare the Fuhrer the embarrassment of having 2 Jews on the winning podium. Marty cursed out Avery Brundage every day of his life. He never got back to the Olympics. Sam thought it wasn't anti-Semitism, but he described in his diary it was the most humiliating episode in his life. Sam never spoke much about it. Marty would speak about it a lot, an awful lot. We were shocked. Sam was stunned. He didn't say a word in the meeting. I was a brash 18-year-old kid. I said, Coach, you can't hide world-class sprinters. At which point Jesse spoke up, said, Coach, I've won my 3 gold medals. I'm tired. I've had it. Let Marty and Sam run. They deserve it. Cromwell pointed his finger at him. You'll do as you're told. In those days, black athletes did do as they were told. And Jesse never said another word. And there is the team that competed. Now, Gretel Bergmann, I interviewed in 1993. And I had never met her. Margaret Lambert was her American name. She married Dr. Bruno Lambert and fled to the United States in 1937. And I said to her, I looked at her. I said, I have just one question, one word question. Why? Her answer was, I needed to give my people hope. You don't understand, everything was being taken away from us. We had no hope. I knew I was never going to be in the Olympics. I knew that, but I had to give people hope. And I knew that it was going to come to a point where they're not going to put me on the team. And I accepted it because I was trying to help my people. The Germans sacrificed the chance for a gold medal with that action. There is Gretel, who ended up in Forest Hills, New York, track and field kind of coach, did other kind of work in the United States, and they became an afterthought until 1980. I was the great Jewish hope. 1937, she obtained papers that allowed her to immigrate to the United States. She landed in New York City with Bruno Lambert. They each had $10, all the money that the Germans would allow her to take out of the country. She worked as a masseuse, a housemaid, later as a physical therapist. In 1937 and 38, she won the women's high jump championships and the 37 shot put championship. She married Bruno Lambert in 1938, became a citizen in 1942. She lived to the age of 107. She faded into obscurity until 1980, when she ended up in the Jewish Hall of Fame at the Wingate Institute in Israel. Her legacy, she finally got her medal at the Atlanta Olympics in 1996. She told me she would never go back to Germany, never ever go back to Germany, but Greenberg and Fuchs at HBO got her to go back there because they were shooting, they shot a video, and they wanted to get her back into Germany, and she did go back to Germany. And she went back to the stadium in Lapham, where she used to train, and found out it was renamed in her honor. HBO special in 2014. She died at 103. It was Claire Hollingsworth who broke the news that Germany invaded Poland. Died in 2017 at 107. She was 103 when she passed away in Forest Hills. Now, there was a Jewish fencer by the name of Helene Meyer. And there she is, right there, giving the salute, the Hitler salute. German authorities allowed Helene Meyer to represent Germany at the Olympics. She was viewed as a non-Aryan because her father was Jewish. Her mother wasn't Jewish. Her father was Jewish. She won a silver medal in the women's individual fencing, and like all other medalists for Germany, gave the Nazi salute on the podium. No other Jewish athlete competed for Germany in the Summer Games. Rudy Ball played hockey for Germany in the Winter Games in Munich in 1936 or Bavaria. And his deal was, I'll play for you, then let me out of the country. And that happened with Rudy Ball. Now, not much is known about Meyer. She was only 42 when she died. There isn't much written correspondence. There are no film clips of her talking about Germany. She never wrote a book. She would flee to California. And that's about all we know of her. In 2000, Sports Illustrated named Meyer the greatest women's fencer of the 20th century. And there is Hitler, and there is Jesse Owens. Hitler had hoped the Berlin Games would prove his theory of Aryan racial superiority. Owens would win 4 medals, 100 meter, 200 meter, long jump, the 4x4, 100 relay, which should have been Marty and Sam. 9 athletes who were Jewish or Jewish parents won medals in the Nazi Olympics, including Meyer and 5 Hungarians. For some reason, Hungarians were great fencers. 7 Jewish male athletes from the United States went to Berlin. Like some of the competitors at the Olympics, many of those men were pressured by Jewish organizations not to go there. Roman Cantor, a Hungarian fencer, died in a concentration camp. Along with E.G. Zebman, Roman Cantor, both died in Majdanek. HBO did 2 specials on the 36 Olympics. One called Bergmann, Hitler's Pawn, excellent thing if you can relocate it, and also Luckman, capital block of letters, also pretty good. Wolfgang Funster was Jewish, and he ran the Olympic Village. 3 days after the Olympics, he killed himself. Shot himself with a pistol on August 19th, 1936. He was afraid they were going to find out that he was Jewish. Neville Chamberlain and appeasement. Also, the International Olympic Committee, Sapporo, Japan, was supposed to get the 1940 Winter Olympics. That was selected in 1937, but the Sino-Japanese War broke out. This led to a change of the host city to St. Moritz, but they said no. And the International Olympic Committee was scrambling for the 1940 Winter Olympics. So, hey, why not give it to Germany? This was after the Germans invaded Austria, 7 months after Kristallnacht. It was less than 3 months before the German troops, or after German troops invaded bits of Czechoslovakia. And that's Mussolini. And the International Olympic Committee took care of him because they gave Italy the 1944 Winter Olympics. Neither Olympics ever took place. Germany invaded Poland in 1939. There were no Olympics for Marty, Sam, and Gretel in 1940 or 44. This guy is an interesting guy. This guy's name is Alfred Necacci. He was from France. He competed for France in the 1936 Olympics, came in fourth, 4x200 swimming relay. Missed the bronze medal by 6 seconds. 1941, he set a world record for the 200-meter breaststroke, beating the German champion along the way. He was a Jewish swimmer. He attracted criticism and was restricted from entering races. And France's leading swimmers also withdrew in protest of his treatment. In January 1944, he, his wife, and 2-year-old daughter were arrested, deported to Auschwitz. Of 1,368 men, women, and children who made the journey, only 47 survived. He did, his wife and daughter didn't. But 1 year after he was liberated from Buchenwald, he was part of a French team swimming that won a world record, set a world record in the 3x100 relay. That year, he became the French national champion at the butterfly and the 4x100 relay, less than a year after he was liberated. And he makes it to the Olympics in 1948. He swims the 200-meter breaststroke, reaching the semifinal. He also was part of the French water polo team. The Munich 11, I'm not going to go too deep into detail about this. As you know, 9 Israeli athletes, 2 Israeli coaches were killed, Black September. First time that Americans saw terrorism in their living room in 1972. The massacre, day of terror, starts September 5th, 1972, 4:30 in the morning, when Black September, an offshoot of the Palestinian group, Fatah, scaled the fences, scaled the fences surrounding an Olympic village in Munich. They were disguised as athletes. They had stolen keys, don't know where they got them. They forced their way into the quarters of the Olympic team for Israel. At 10 p.m., September 5th, the German authorities thought they got an agreement. The terrorists led their bound and blindfolded hostages from their quarters into buses. They went to waiting helicopters. They land at an airport, and the German tried to ambush everybody, and that was a fiasco. Jim McKay was on ABC for about 14 straight hours. At 3 a.m., broadcast from the Olympic Village. They pulled him out of the swimming pool, told him, just throw a jacket on, don't worry about what you're wearing, nobody's going to see underneath. Put a shirt on and tie, 14 straight hours at 3 a.m. local time. They're all gone. German authorities never stormed Building 31. They allowed the terrorists to take the hostages by helicopter to a nearby military base. There, the Germans planned an ambush and rescue attempt, and it was bungled. The 9 Israeli hostages killed by a combination of gunfire and a hand grenade set off in the helicopter as they sat on the ground. By 12:30 in the morning, the shooting had stopped. 11 Israelis had been killed. 1 Munich policeman, 5 Black September terrorists were dead. 3 of the gunmen captured. Howard Cosell was part of that. Howard once told me that he realized he was Jewish again in Munich. We have an immense flurry of action here, Cosell told Peter Jennings. Police in platoon-like numbers are staging in front of us. Howard wanted to be Jim McKay. Rune Arliss said Jim McKay is going to be on you go out in the field. Richard Nixon was very unhappy that the Olympics continued. Nixon sends a telegram that demands that the rest of the games be called off, but Avery Brundage, who earlier in 1971 said the 1936 Berlin Olympics was the finest games ever held, said the games must go on. And the games did go on. Mark Spitz was there, and I interviewed Spitz. He set a record, winning 7 gold medals in swimming, and this is his account, as told to me in 1999. The swimming program had stopped. I swam all of my events, and that evening, the last day of competition, was on a Monday, and this happened on Tuesday on the morning. Swimming was through, so I didn't have to compete anymore. I had a press conference right afterwards on Tuesday, and that's when everyone told me about this Israeli tragedy or thing that was happening at the time. Hadn't turned into a major tragedy at the moment, at least at the time. They didn't know much about it. The next day, I was whisked away. Brundage offered a 27-word tribute to our Israeli friends. Brundage, who was the IOC, ordered the competition to resume after 34 hours. Howard Cosell used to tell me that Avery Brundage came of age during the time of William of Orange. You ever go to Delft in the Netherlands, there is a William of Orange Grand Cafe. I sent that picture to Howard's grandsons, Colin and Justin, and they started laughing. Papa would love you. That's what he used to say. Avery Brundage came of age during the time of William of Orange. 1976, no memorial, although the Israeli team came in during the opening ceremony with a black ribbon on the national flag. 2012, there was no honor on the 40th anniversary. At last, 2016, there was an honor, but there was a catch. It was all Olympians who died during the Olympics, which meant a guy from Georgia who was killed performing the luge in Vancouver would be lumped in with these 11 Israeli athletes. And there's Thomas Bach, the International Olympic Committee president, signing the proclamation remembering the athletes. Germany has never held another Olympics. Boxing and basketball, quickest way out of the ghetto for some Jewish kids, whether the ghetto was in Washington, whether it was in Brooklyn, whether it was the Lower East Side or Chicago, was boxing or basketball. Benny Leonard, one of the greatest lightweights of all time. He was born Benjamin Leiner, turned pro at 15, won the World Lightweight Championship at 29, held it for 7 years, retired unbeaten. However, he made investments in the stock market. Had crashed. He made a comeback in 1931, won 18 in a row with only one draw, and then he would lose to Jimmy McClellan, and that was the end of his career. Daniel Mendoza was the first Jewish boxing champion. He was an English prize fighter who was the 16th boxing champion from England, 1792 through 95. He was Sephardic. He was an accomplished and scientific fighter. He was intelligent, communicative, a master of ring strategy and defense, several rungs above his contemporaries. There is Barney Ross, another great fighter, one of the first multi-champions, lightweight, junior welterweight, and welterweight championships, third boxer ever to accomplish that. Basketball, that's Dolph Schayes from New York, and Dolph Schayes could never sign with the New York Knicks because there was a salary cap. Back in the 1950s, he ended up in Syracuse with the Syracuse Nationals, made a good life in Syracuse for himself. The Philadelphia Spas. Philadelphia Spas were a front runner of the Washington Generals. Hey, they were just the South Philadelphia Hebrew Association, a gym, you know, one of these places like your place in Pittsfield. And they had a team. And the team was really good, really, really, really good. And the other kids would never play him. The only kids that would play would be the black kids. And out of those black kids became the Harlem Globetrotters because Abe Saperstein put it together, seeing the Jews and the black guys play each other. The Jews ruled basketball. Paul Gallico, who was the sports editor of the New York Daily News in 1938, he left to become a screenwriter and a book writer. So Goose Stories and Poseidon Adventures were his. In 1938, Gallico wrote in the New York Daily News, that basketball appears to the Hebrew with his Oriental background. I don't know where that came from, but anyway, because the game places a premium on an alert, scheming mind and flashy trickiness, artful dodging, and general smart aleckiness. Didn't know that's what you had to do to play basketball. But anyway, some of the great legendary coaches, Claire B., Nat Holman, and the big cigar himself, as Pat Riley used to call him, Red Auerbach, who came out of Brooklyn. And the other Red Holtzman. Red Holtzman once told me, gave me this bit of philosophy. I had a lot of hair back in those days. He said, never go to a bald barber because he has no respect for your hair. Red Holtzman. The first NBA points scored by this guy, Ozzie Sheckman. That was a game, the New York Knicks against the Toronto Huskies. He scored the first 2 points. His teammates on the New York Knicks those days, Sonny Hertzberg, Stan Stutz, Hank Rosenstein, Ralph Kaplowitz, Jake Weber, and Leo Ace Gottlieb, all on the New York Knicks. Max Zalowski was also with the Knicks. The early days of the NBA loaded with Jews. Sue Bird in the Women's National Basketball League is Jewish as well. Hey, look at that motley crew. I'm there in the back. There's Warner Wolf, whose father was in the second generation of Three Stooges. And there's Art Shamsky next to Kenny Albert. And there is Len Berman, who was with WNBC in New York. What a motley crew that was. Football, well, you got to be a football hero. That's Benny Friedman. Benny Friedman was a great quarterback with the New York Giants. When he turned pro, the college football sensation was greeted with fanfare exceeded only by Red Grange. He could run, kick, pass the ball better than any player who preceded him. Following the 1928 season, Tim Mara purchased the Detroit franchise, which was going bust, because he wanted Benny Friedman. And Benny Friedman became the New York Giants' Jewish star, the one that John J. McGraw never had. His decision based on gate appeal. There's Sid Luckman, the Chicago Bears. He had a legendary career at Erasmus High School in Brooklyn, became a star at Columbia University. After college, George Halas brought him to the Chicago Bears. He would win 4 championships. Got a quick story about Bobby Lane. This was told to me by Mike Ditka, and he was talking about Bobby Lane, and he was drafted by the Chicago Bears, and he thought he was better than Sid Luckman. And George Halas brought him into the office. He says, you know, Sid Luckman, you know, he's Jewish. He said, oh, was he? He said, yeah. He says, do you know how many Jewish fans the Chicago Bears have? He said, can you imagine what would happen if I got rid of Sid Luckman to those people? He said, Johnny Lujak. He's the backup quarterback. He went to Notre Dame. You know how many Notre Dame fans that are Chicago Bears season ticket holders as well? If I got rid of him, where are they going to go? You came from Texas. You know how many Chicago Bear fans come from Texas? 0. He trades him. The Jewish drawing card, Jewish sports hero, lofty level, Hank Greenberg, Sandy Koufax, Sid Luckman. Still in Chicago, a big name, and Bobby Lane was traded. Sid Gilman is considered the father of the modern passing offense in football. His first pro coaching job was the Los Angeles Rams, and they threw the football. He goes to San Diego in the American Football League. They throw the football. Nancy, that one's for you. There's Allie Sherman, who is the New York Giants coach, who was the inventor of the West Coast offense, according to Bill Walsh, because Walsh said, I stole everything from Allie Sherman's teams from the New York Giants, 1961, 1962, 63 with Y.A. Tittle. Greasy Neal said of Sherman, very smart guy. I've never seen a player with a greater understanding of the game. He was so dedicated, he insisted on rooming with a lineman. He wanted to absorb the way a lineman thought. We looked at films for hours. And when I had enough, he'd take the films to his room and watch them for the rest of the night. Allie was a successful TV executive after his playing days. Ron Mix, still active as a lawyer. He's about 83 years old now. He started with the Los Angeles Chargers in 1960. Marshall Goldberg, another great football player. And Julian Edelman with the New England Patriots is stunning for his bar mitzvah. Talked about Mark Spitz, Dana Torres, another great swimmer. She's the most decorated Jewish Olympian ever. She competed in 5 Olympics over 24 years. During the Olympics, she won medals, 3 medals, 4 times for a total of 4. Her 12 medals placed her in a tie for 5th. Although her father was Jewish, she converted to Judaism after marrying her second husband, an Israeli doctor. Tennis, Dick Savitt. He was the 2nd player to win the Australian Open in Wimbledon in the same season. He won the singles and doubles at the 1961 Maccabi Games, and he finished 4 seasons in the top 10. Amy Alcott in golf, she won 29 tournaments and 5 majors during her 35-year career. And there is Sandy Koufax. Sandy Koufax, who, of course, sat out on Yom Kippur in 1965. This is what Casey Stengel once said about Sandy Koufax. You can forget about the other guy, Walter Johnson. You can forget about Rube Waddell. The Jewish kid is probably the best of them. Koufax, well, about being Jewish and about missing the game in 1965 for Yom Kippur. I want to enjoy this while it lasts. The end could come at any day. I have an obligation to the kids. I often wonder which comes first, success or confidence. I never figured it out. Pitcher can get by with 1 pitch to fastball if he has control. Norm Sherry, Jewish guy. Norm Sherry was the catcher who harnessed Sandy Koufax's fastball when he was the backup catcher with the Los Angeles Dodgers, and he figured out what Sandy was doing wrong. It's too good a life. When will it end? The hitters will let me know. His left elbow gave out in 1966 when he was 30 years old. Yom Kippur and Don Drysdale. Sandy sat out the game in Minnesota. He wasn't particularly religious, but he owed it to the faith, and he was stuck in some hotel room in St. Paul. Don Drysdale pitched that day, October 6, 1965, Game 1 of the World Series. The commissioner determined the dates of the World Series, and on September 8th, the Dodgers were still in 2nd place. Not that it would have mattered. Anyway, from what I've been told, there are no dispensations for this particular day. But then I haven't really talked to a rabbi. If we saw up the pennant, I plan to take it up and find out what the proceedings. If I'm told it isn't proper to pitch, then I won't, because I won't feel right about it. According to UPI's Milty Richmond, Uncle Milty, Koufax made up his mind on choosing religion over the World Series in 1959 when the championship coincided with Rosh Hashanah. He did not attend workouts at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, nor did he pitch in Game 4. A man is entitled to his belief, and I believe I should not work on Yom Kippur. It's as simple as that. I've never had any trouble on that account since I've been in baseball. In April 1959, Koufax requested to skip his start on April 22nd, being the first night of Passover. Well, there's 13-month years probably. Similarly, in 1961 and 63, Koufax skipped his turns in the rotation, which conflicted with Rosh Hashanah. Teammate Larry Sherry, also Jewish, is believed to have sat out for the holiday in 1961. Norm Sherry was also on that team. 3 Jews, 1959, Los Angeles Dodgers. Game 7. It's Game 7. Well, let's talk about Game 1. Drysdale pitches, and Walter Alston comes out to the mound because Drysdale is getting lit up. I knew Don Drysdale a little bit, really nice guy. And Walter Alston comes to the mound, asks for the ball. Don Drysdale looks at him, he says, I bet you wish I was Jewish today. Game 7, 1965, Sandy pitched on 2 days rest. He and Jim Cott went head-to-head in Game 7. 2 runs, 3rd inning. Lou Johnson's solo home run. RBI single by Wes Parker knocked Cott out, provided all the offense Koufax needed. He went the distance. All 9 innings in Game 7. He earned his 2nd World Series MVP and his 4th ring. And there he is, Sandy Koufax. I grew up in New York, in Lower East Side, in Queens, and heard all about Hank Greenberg and then Sandy Koufax. And I moved to Rockland County, the Ramapo, which was predominantly Jewish, and still heard about Sandy Koufax. Thank you, Nancy, so much for inviting me. And I know I've gone probably a little long, but any questions or any comments?
If anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to ask Evan. You are wealth of knowledge.
Great job, Evan.
Who's that? I can't see the speaker. Let me get this.
Michael Bernstein.
Oh, thank you.
Just a great job, Evan. Appreciate it. Enjoyed it a lot.
Michael is a big Sandy Koufax fan. You grew up in LA, right?
Yep.
Yeah, you grew up in LA. So
Got to meet him 3 times.
So
once on the golf course.
Did you know about the Passover stories?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So anybody else? It's got to be somebody else have something to say. If nobody else has anything to say, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight.
Hi, Nancy. If I could ask one question.
Who is it?
Please.
Steve Rubin.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, Evan. Thanks an awful lot for this very comprehensive list and history. Just wanted to ask you what your sense is of anti-Semitism in professional sports or college sports, for that matter, these days.
I don't think it exists that much anymore. I know that it was prevalent in the 1960s in the National Hockey League. There was something in the Toronto Globe and Mail, of all things, back, I'd say about 10 years ago, about Gary Bettman. And the Toronto Globe and Mail is supposed to be the national paper of Canada. It's supposed to be the New York Times, and they still had cartoonists there. And they depicted Gary Bettman as a rat. And I was talking to Stan Fischler. If you're a hockey fan, you know who Stan Fischler is. He's been writing about hockey since since Lord Stanley handed out the first cup in 1893. And we're talking about how the Toronto Globe, of all things, Globe and Mail, had this caricature of him looking straight out of a 1920s European newspaper. And I didn't get into that in this one, but one of the responses to the start of the Maccabee games was because of the cartoons that appeared in the papers in Europe in the 1920s. And Jews said, we're going to show them. We're going to show that we're powerfully built, that we're good looking. We're going to have our own games. And they did in Haifa in 1932, which became the Maccabee games. Baseball, look, Marvin Miller made the players a lot of money, and Don Fehr came after him as the executive directors of the Baseball Players Association. I don't think that you see that in baseball. I haven't heard anything. I really haven't heard anything over the years about it, other than, you might have an occasional thing here or there, but you know what? There's too much money to be made today that you want to play around being an anti-Semite, because you don't want to be outed as an anti-Semite or a racist.
Your president.
And then also the other thing is, if you look at the owners of teams, there are a lot of Jewish owners, an awful lot of Jewish owners as well. There are a lot of Jewish baseball players as well these days. So I haven't heard it, and I haven't heard, but I was disappointed in the Toronto Globe and Mail when they had the caricature that looked straight out of European newspapers in the 1920s of Gary Bettman.
When was that, Evan?
Probably about 10 years ago. I got to look at my files. Probably about 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, somewhere else. And and you think Toronto Globe and Mail, that is a sizably well-known intellectual newspaper. It's not, like the Toronto Sun. It's the Toronto Globe and Mail.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yes.
Michael Kaplan?
Michael, Hi, Michael. How are you?
Hi. Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting.
Thank
Any
you.
idea why Lippman Pike never entered into the Hall of Fame?
No.
No thoughts?
No. I don't think that the old timers even come up with him. I don't know. He was around for about 10 years, and he was the first paid player, and he also led the nation in home runs. Maybe somebody should send something to Cooperstown and say, hey, why don't you revisit Lippman Pike? It's kind of, I don't know. I really don't know. I have a raised hand from Maryland, so why don't I I have a raised hand. I guess Maryland wants to say something.
Maryland.
It's actually Ellie Katzman. Maryland's here.
Hello,
But,
Marilyn
thank
and
you for-
Ellie. How are you tonight?
We're fine, thank you. I just was curious as to why you left out the CCNY basketball team back in the whatever year that was.
Well,
That
I
great
did mention
Jewish
about
basketball.
Claire B. I did mention about Claire B. I actually talk about that in my gambling talk. You're talking about the 50-51 teams, the
Yes.
ones that won both the NCAA and the NIT, and they found out about point shaving, right?
Correct.
They only have an hour and a half. But I just talked about that. That was a team that Floyd Lane was on, among others, and that was the point shaving.
Erwin Dambrot.
Yeah, that was point shaving when Frank Hogan decided to go after them for whatever reason. I guess it was a political reason. I didn't talk about also, I can't remember his name now, the guy that got Connie Hawkins, Doug Moe, and Roger Brown in trouble, who was around Kutcher. And talking about Kutchers and Milton Kutcher and Julius Kutcher and how the NBA was there in the 1950s. And Jack Molinas, who was Jewish. I didn't talk about him either. I mean, I could actually go on and talking about those guys and talking about how the NBA was literally in the summer. If you wanted to find the entire NBA, they were at Kutcher's during the summer, and the Catskills playing a major role in the NBA back in those days. But as CCNY, that was Claire B. That was Nat Holman. What was it, Holman? Or
Yep.
Nat Holman.
Yeah. So
Yep,
I did mention him. So, but can't mention everybody.
Bye. You pretty much covered it all.
Not really. There's about Jacobson. I didn't end it the way I should have. Let me ask you a question. Was Jacobson right or wrong about screaming about the Jewish mothers not wanting their kids to play? John J. McGraw brought that up in the 1920s. That the kids were expected to get an education. This baseball thing, you fooled around with baseball for a little bit. Here's a bit of trivia for you. The last home run Babe Ruth hit as a New York Yankee, his 708th home run, was against Washington. And you're never going to get the answer, but I'll ask anyway. Who was the pitcher who threw Babe Ruth's 708th home run, his last home run with the New York Yankees? Any idea?
No.
Well, it was Sid Cohen. Sid Cohen, brother of Andy Cohen. And I got a quick Sid Cohen story for you, and then we'll wrap it up because you probably are bored and tired of me anyway. Sid Cohen lived in El Paso, Texas, and baseball players didn't make much money. Didn't make much money at all back in those days. So in the offseason, he played in the Mexican League. Remember that stereotype of Andy Cohen, his brother? He was dark, stocky, dark complexion, dark hair. Well, Sid decided to use that dark complexion, dark hair thing in Mexico. And he became a pitcher in Mexico in the Mexican Winter League under the name of Pablo Garcia. He was Sid Cohen by day, Pablo Garcia by night over in Mexico. There were a lot of stories that I did leave out because of time. Like I did mention Jimmy Reese, Jaime Solomon, and I'll give you this very quick story. I'm just going to give you these Henny Youngman one-liners here. And I was talking to Jimmy Reese in the 1990s. He was 93 years old, and he was he's still with the Anaheim Angels as a coach. He didn't really do anything except tell stories. Nolan Ryan named his first kid after him, Reese Ryan. Anyway, now to make a long story short, I said, how'd you end up rooming with Babe Ruth? He said, well, the Yankee managers figured that I was a smart Jewish guy, and maybe a smart Jewish guy could knock some sense into Babe that he shouldn't be burning both candles at the ends. And he said, but I never really roomed with him. I roomed with his suitcases, but I never saw him. But one interesting thing that he told me about Babe was that every Friday night, remember the game started at 3 o'clock, and they were done by 5 o'clock. And Babe lived on Riverside Drive. And he said that every Friday night that Babe would invite him to dinner when the Yankees were home at his house in Riverside Drive. And they would have what amounted to be the traditional Jewish Friday night dinner. No prayers or anything of that nature, but that's what Jimmy Reese said. He said he was kind of stunned by it, that Babe actually knew some Jewish tradition and tried to make me feel at home, which reminds me of another story. And this will be the last one. Wilt Chamberlain, although I could probably do the rest of the night stories. Wilt Chamberlain, best friend with Cy Goldberg from Overbrook High School in Philadelphia. Wilt grew up with Jews, and he was kind of the illegitimate son of Mildred Kutcher at Kutcher's. They loved him, and he felt he was part of their family. But anyway, Cy did a lot for Wilt money-wise over the years. And they're out in Los Angeles, and Cy says, we're having the Seder, and do you want to come? And Wilt said, of course I'll come. So Wilt comes, and he's dressed to the nines, and he's got this $900 suit on, and he's all dressed up. And he walks into Cy's house, and Cy's looking around, and Wilt's there, and Wilt looks, he says, what are we dressed for? He said, this is a ceremony. I'm not starting this until you all get dressed properly. Wilt made them get dressed for the Seder. He felt it was a significant, very, very significant, and he wanted the Goldbergs to show the proper respect for the Seder. And like I said, Milton Kutcher, Julius Kutcher, Mrs. Kutcher, all of them thought of Wilt as family, literally as family. Red Auerbach was a waiter up at Kutcher's basketball court. It's now up in Vermont, the Kutcher's Sports Academy, because Kutcher's isn't there anymore. And I spent, before it closed, I used to speak up there. 2006 was the last time I spoke up there, and I missed Shecky Green's annual retirement tour by 3 days. Shecky Green up at Kutcher's. Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you, Nancy. I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Thank you,
Before
Ed.
I go, anybody else? Before I go, if nobody else, I'll be back, I think, November 23rd, because we're doing 1963, the day after the Kennedy assassination anniversary and everything that happened during 1963. So we'll see you then. Thank you, Nancy, for inviting me.
Great to be with you again. Thank you all for being here this
And I hope to see you in the summer.
Yes.
Alive.
We'll be there. Okay.
Thanks, everybody, for being